Over the past few days to a week, there's been a lot of talk and news around Cyberpunk 2077. Although during this time, for better or worse, some of the recent controversies around the game have been getting quite a bit more attention than those actual gameplay details. In this video, I'm not going to focus too much on that controversy, many other people have done that already, but rather share with you some of the other news that has come out over the past few days that you'll probably be interested in. Some of this officially from CD Projekt for Cyberpunk 2077, and other aspects from different interviews that were going on during E3 or just other details that have come out along the way. This video is going to have a lot of info, so if you guys do enjoy, you can leave a like or subscribe. You can expect a lot of additional Cyberpunk videos in the future. And if you actually missed my impressions after seeing an hour or so of gameplay behind closed doors, you could click in the I now to see that video. But first things first, depending on when you're watching this, because I'm slightly pre-recording it as I do have to travel this weekend, CD Projekt is releasing additional special editions for Cyberpunk 2077. Initially, it was announced how there wouldn't be special editions for the PC version of the game in North America, but since that news came out and a lot of people are like, hey, I actually would really like that, they have changed their minds. So at 10 a.m. Pacific time today, you will be able to acquire a physical copy of Cyberpunk 2077 on PC in the US or Canada. That's something you couldn't previously do. If you want some conversions for that time zone, look at this chart. Although depending on when this video goes live, it's probably in just a couple of hours, so I would keep on top of it. And yeah, that's definitely appreciated. It's pretty cool to see that they're actually listening to fan feedback and getting this turned around in literally just 1 week. Outside of that, we also did learn when this gameplay demo is coming out. If you're not familiar, during E3, again, referencing that video I posted a couple of days ago, they showed roughly 50 minutes of new gameplay around Cyberpunk to industry, press, media, all behind closed doors. We could talk about our reception, but not actually show you the gameplay. Although this trailer is actually kind of snippets or a cut down version of the gameplay, if you're curious. Well, either way, you will actually gain access to that gameplay, and we have gotten official confirmation of when, and that's going to be during Pax West. And I gotta say again, after actually seeing that gameplay, it will be worth the wait. Certainly feels like there's a lot more going on in that one compared to the first one you did see last year. And although yes, there is still a few months to wait, at least now we actually know exactly when it will be coming out. But following E3, we've also been seeing some pretty interesting promotion around Cyberpunk 2077 from their official Twitter account. On this account, they have been tweeting out pretty interesting images with interesting captions to go along with them. I'll have links to all these down below. I'm not going to read the full captions for all of them, but effectively it seems like these are going to be concept art for the game and actually give you a look at some of the things we can see in-game at a later date. Naturally, it's concept art, so just because this guy is holding a Jaguar doesn't necessarily mean we'll be able to get a pet Jaguar, but what it seems like these are really showcasing or describing are some of the various things that go on in Night City in Cyberpunk 2077, the various groups of people you will encounter. In the first one, you do see necessity over style, people just trying to survive that are probably pretty poor. Then we do have style over substance. Here you're going to see people that just want to look great and want to look flashy, even though they may not have the money to use it, so sometimes some of the stuff is artificial or not totally genuine. Then you do have substance over style, that's more of a military look, more of the practical side of things and actually being effective at what they do. And then we do get the wealthy, that does have substance and style. So it seems like this is predominantly just for promotion around the game and not to be taken too literally, but you have to imagine some of these major themes will carry over. You'll see different groups of people that actually fit these mentalities. But even further, I wouldn't be surprised if some of the items, weapons, or vehicles you actually see in these images will later be available in-game. And when considering that, it does make it pretty interesting. Will there actually be pets or animals of some kind in Cyberpunk? Even further, that is a futuristic styled Bugatti. Are we actually going to see Bugattis in Cyberpunk 2077? Because that would be really cool. I mean, the logo is basically the same thing. I feel like it'd be kind of weird to rip off the car to this degree and also rip off the logo if there was no partnership here, but again, it is just concept art, so take it with a grain of salt. And even further, they are still posting these, although now around some of the major characters such as Dex, and we also did get one for Bug that gives short descriptions for each of these. Dex we of course see quite a bit of in the previous gameplay. Outside of that, we also did get several new interviews from members of CD Projekt Red and mostly people working on Cyberpunk. Through this, we we've heard many new details about the game, and more or less I went through several of the higher profile interviews containing good and interesting information and compiled them into a bit of a list that I'll talk about here, although you could find links to everything down below. One of the first important questions that I do see is kind of how they have so much diversity and so many different options as far as quests and quest solutions go. Looking at the gameplay I saw behind closed doors and even the older gameplay that you're seeing in the background, it seems kind of crazy to think about how many different ways you could solve some of these problems or finish the quest. As far as how this is made possible, it's described how one, they have a fairly large development team at around 450 people, but even beyond that the way they're actually building out some of these quests is fairly systematic, allowing them to reuse some past components when creating some of these alternate outcomes. Even further, another big question was around gunplay. CD Projekt, coming off of The Witcher 3, isn't particularly known for gunplay, but in this interview they describe how gunplay was actually one of the things they've been working on in Cyberpunk 2077 since the beginning, because it is such a core part of this game, and they do really want to get it correct. Even further, as far as the questing itself goes in this game, one type of quest they actually banned that I think a lot of us will be happy to hear are those quests that just involve go to this location, kill a couple of enemies, and that's the entire quest. So assuming this banned comment is true, we should hypothetically see 0 of those kinds of things in Cyberpunk, which I am very welcoming of. But even further, and one thing I mentioned after seeing the most recent gameplay was the dialogue. It seemed like in some instances it was fairly minimal. You didn't talk a bunch, and rather you just had a few exchanges, then got on with whatever the quest was. It's described in this interview how that's actually intentional, and the dialogue system is built out in a way that if you're somebody that just wants to run and gun, you'll have the option to get through dialogue and get all of the main points fairly quickly. You don't have to spend as much time speaking to NPCs, and you could spend a lot more actually fighting them. But of course, there is alternatively the option to actually talk quite a bit more. You could find out further details about the quest you're doing, or just talk more in general to the NPC, and this may actually give you additional options later on. They describe how, although it's not required for you to spend a lot of time talking to NPCs, if you do, oftentimes it'll come with a reward of some kind. And that theme of options is really persistent through all of Cyberpunk. They describe how their main goal with The Witcher 3 was to incorporate a branching storyline in an open world, but with Cyberpunk they want to grow on that idea even further, as to not just have a branching storyline in an open world, but also have branching gameplay. As a result of this, you're going to have a lot of different things, whether it be skill checks based on some of the ways you spec out your character, the influence your life trait may have, so you'll get additional speech checks based on that. There's going to be different gameplay styles, something pretty common in several RPGs. You could go the sneak route, you could go the guns blazing route, you go the netrunner route and try and hack into just about everything. But also a cool feature that's getting implemented into this game from the start is actually almost an alternate start-esque feature. I'm sure many of you are familiar with alternate start mods for Fallout or Skyrim. Basically, it allows you to choose your character's description, and that will control where you actually originally spawn in the world. Well, Cyberpunk is getting that. Based on certain options you can pick during character creation, you will start in different areas. One interview describes starting in the Badlands, which is kind of the outskirts of Night City, but seemingly, depending on what kind of choices you make, you could also start within the city, or maybe even in one of the wealthier parts of the city. Speaking of character creation, they're giving you a lot of options here, and these options will be reflected in the gameplay. There are choices to change the sex of your character, but even further, you could actually change some of the voice types, meaning you could have a traditionally male body with a traditionally female voice type, or even further, they describe how you could have a male body but enhance some of the female features, or vice versa. But it's not like these are just cosmetic changes. This will affect how other characters see you and probably react to you. They also talk about how romance is going to be a fairly fundamental aspect of this game. It's definitely not something they're going to shy away from because, as they describe, we're people. Romance exists, so they're putting it in their game. In a lot of these interviews, Johnny Silverhand, the character being played by Keanu Reeves, is brought up. Keanu Reeves is going to be playing a very main and central role in Cyberpunk 2077. He was described as almost a second protagonist, but even further, he's dynamic. You have your goals and he's going to have his goals. Sometimes they'll align, sometimes you'll be friendly, but it seems like you could also not be friendly. One interview from Keanu himself actually gives a pretty good example of how dynamic or interesting this relationship will likely be.
I'm kind of a guide, but I'm also... You have you have to do something, but Johnny wants to do something too. And so there's this, am I your friend? Am I a foe? Am I really helping you? Am I not helping you? Are you in my way?
He just has such a way with words. But it seems like that Johnny Silverhand is going to be one of those characters that accompanies you throughout pretty much the entire game, which is actually a pretty interesting gameplay mechanic. I can't think of another major RPG like this that actually had someone kind of in your head the whole time. It makes you wonder how much replayability will be available through this particular character. Let's say you do a playthrough where you side with Johnny Silverhand or just trying to appease him the entire time, but a different one where you don't and just go against him the entire time. You have to imagine that'll have a pretty significant influence on gameplay. Naturally, since the game isn't even out yet, we haven't heard a ton about DLC, although they did touch on it in some of these interviews. They mentioned how they're not going to be doing DLC where they withhold parts of the main story, so the game you get this April will definitely be complete, but DLC in the form of expansions is likely on the way. Outside of that, they actually talk a bit about multiplayer in Cyberpunk. The interviewer here draws parallels between Cyberpunk and Grand Theft Auto, and thus asks if there is any potential of something like a Grand Theft Auto Online in Cyberpunk 2077. They mention how right now, as development does continue, single player is without a doubt their sole focus on the game, but they don't rule out a multiplayer mode in the future completely, saying it is definitely possible. Roughly 1 year ago, I reported on something similar. It was the possibility of a Battle Royale mode for Fallout 76. Outside of that, some of the other miscellaneous details that I did pick up, there's going to be various body slots you do have to insert different pieces of cyberware, but there's actually going to be a limit seemingly in the amount of cyberware your body can take. Even further, there are going to be flying vehicles in this game, but they'll all be scripted, so you won't actually be able to man them yourself, and the same goes for boats. You won't be able to actually control the boats, although there is going to be swimming in Cyberpunk 2077, and they mention how similar to The Witcher 3, certain quests may be focused around swimming. Also, pretty similar to The Witcher 3, you're going to have the ability to actually call your car. The cars in this universe do have an AI associated with them, so it'll drive itself to you. They mention how there's going to be several different apartments, and all of these apartments will have fairly large garages. You'll be able to, one, build a collection of cars here, but even further, they're really trying to make the various cars in this game feel different or unique, not all just reskins of one another. And they say, likely as a result of that effort, some of the cars will end up getting cut before the final game does come out. And yeah, that's a good chunk of the news we've recently gotten around Cyberpunk 2077. There are a lot of additional interviews out there, so many that I simply can't cover all of them in one video. What I did try to do was cover some of the more significant ones, the ones that carried pretty major details. Again, I didn't really want to touch on the recent controversies in this video, it just didn't really seem appropriate. I wanted to keep things more just factual and get you guys excited for the future of this game. I'll have links to all of the interviews I talk about, as well as additional ones if you do want to find out more about Cyberpunk 2077. But based off everything I hear here, it just gets me more excited for this game, almost to a scary degree. Like, some of these aspects just sound too good that I'm worried I'll be prone to disappointment. I think all of us should probably have at least some degree of effort to keep our expectations in check, but either way, we don't have that much longer to wait now until we get the game ourselves. As always, again, I thank you for watching. If you guys do want to subscribe, there will be without a doubt more Cyberpunk content on the way, but until then, I hope to see you guys all next time. Later.